Hey gang, it's Squill, and welcome to the first episode of Adventure Time Quickies, a series of shorter videos in which I discuss individual episodes of Adventure Time. I had the idea while working on my Adventure Time retrospective series. While doing the top 10 lists, I noticed that there were some episodes I had too much to say about for a short 1 to 2 minute segment. So I figured this would be a good opportunity for me to go more in depth about episodes I talked about in those top 10 lists, as well as talk about episodes that I wouldn't really get the chance to discuss otherwise. And one episode I feel as if I could have gone more in depth about is Season 5's Dungeon Train. Dungeon Train comes at an interesting point in Adventure Time. We were right off the heels of Finn and Flame Princess's breakup, and if you've seen my Season 5 retrospective, you should know that this is an arc I'm not the biggest fan of. This is partially because I feel as though they went too far in Finn's characterization here. I mean, I like Finn being a flawed protagonist, but him manipulating two innocent people into fighting each other just feels kinda out of character. But I could have gotten over that if the rest of the season had actually taken Finn's breakup seriously, instead of just making jokes about how pathetic he's become. And Dungeon Train is proof of that. The idea of this infinite dungeon train is an inherently fun concept. I mean, there's a reason why a show like Infinity Train exists to take this concept and run with it. Well, it used to exist anyways. God, I hate David Zaslav. But it also works perfectly as a coping mechanism for Finn. Beating up generic enemies is a way to distract himself from his breakup. There's a line Finn has near the end of Act 2 that I find really interesting. When Jake asks Finn to leave with him, Finn says, "No, it's better on the train. Stuff makes sense here." I think this plays into the black and white view of the world that Finn has in the earlier seasons. This idea he has that he's the hero and he needs to stop the evil from happening. The idea that Finn himself is capable of evil just doesn't make sense to him, so he'd rather spend his time fighting generic no-name enemies that he knows are evil than actually dealing with his issues. I love the background music that plays when Finn and Jake are fighting the first boss. It feels straight out of a video game. I've always found it interesting how the cave that Finn and Jake were originally going to in this episode ends up being the Hall of Egress that they revisit in the titular Season 7 episode. I always wondered what it would be like if Finn went through the Hall of Egress in Season 5 instead of Season 7. I honestly don't think Finn would have been able to make it through at that point in the series. Partially due to his mental state, dealing with the breakup and all, but also partially due to Season 5B's unflattering portrayal of Finn as a whole. But I also don't think Finn would have needed the Dungeon Train in Season 7, since by this point in the series, Finn is better at dealing with his own mental health. I don't know, I just think it's an interesting observation, that neither of these concepts really work if you take them out and place them in different seasons. And they would have made it to the Hall of Egress too if Jake had just thought to stretch over the train instead of going through it. This is very nitpicky, I know. Just one of the many examples throughout the series where Jake could have used his powers, but for whatever reason decides not to. Speaking of Jake, I've been talking a lot about Finn in this episode, but he gets some great stuff too. There's a good sense of progression to Jake's arc in this episode. He starts out loving the train just like Finn, but slowly growing more bored and annoyed by it as the episode goes on. But despite this, he's never quite able to leave Finn's side, which is shown through the future orb in which Jake is still hanging by Finn even decades later. It's super sweet, and just another example of how great of a big brother Jake is to Finn. Also, shout out to this scene with Jake and the monkey on top of the train. It's pretty inconsequential to the rest of the episode, but it has such a great sense of atmosphere and is a nice little quiet moment in an otherwise very high concept episode. Though it always kinda breaks my heart a little when the monkey ends up betraying Jake. I find the conclusion here to be very interesting too. That Finn realizes he'll need to leave the train eventually, but doesn't do so at the end of this episode, instead sometime off screen in between this and Bot's Prince. I just think it's a very nice realistic way to end the episode. That Finn still needs time to work through some stuff, but he will eventually get to where he needs to be. The dungeon train can be a healthy space for Finn to deal with his emotions, just as long as he acknowledges that it isn't permanent. It's a very smart way to end the episode. Dungeon Train is a really fun episode that uses its high concept to explore Finn's emotions. It's easily the best episode in the breakup arc, unless you count Bun Bun, and one of my favorite Season 5 episodes as a whole. Please let me know your thoughts on this episode, as well as what future Adventure Time episodes you want me to do a quickie on, in the comments. Squill out.